the essence of what Sheena's Place was in the beginning. I still feel it every time I walk in the door. And there's something kind of magical about that in spite of the many, many hands who have passed the baton forward, there's still that wonderful energy where people feel that they've got a safe haven or an oasis of support, where people believe in them, and there's some services there to really help them learn to believe in themselves.
We were very diligent in trying to get to the bottom of what clients wanted and needed. That's where the idea formed. And we went from that concept to what could do the most good for the most people. That allowed us to create our resource support center here for those with eating disorders and those who love them.
And I walked in and someone who worked there was standing in the kitchen, and she said to me, she's like, "Oh, hi, are you here for one of our classes?" And I said yes, and it was the first day. And she's like, "Oh yeah, I can show you where." She goes, "I'm making a cup of tea though, do you want a cup of tea?" And then I was just like, "Oh, okay, like, yeah, sure." So she made me a cup of tea, and she just like kind of small talked with me a little bit as she was making the tea, like she had known me for all of these years.
And I remember just walking into Sheena's Place, and instantly I just felt the warmth, the comfort, the confidentiality, everything about it was just, phew, I'm in the right place.
I was so pleasantly surprised, and I felt very like put at ease, really. Just like the simple act of making someone tea, it really took the edge off of me. So by the time I came in and sat down, I was like, okay, I'm gonna be fine. This is fine. It was really, really welcoming, and it did set the tone for what the rest of the course was gonna be like for me throughout those 2 months or so that I was here. It was great.
And I remember actually coming upstairs into this very room where I'm sitting right now. And I remember the facilitator just going around and asking everybody how their loved one was doing. And I remember sitting here thinking, oh my gosh, this one's been sick for 3 years, this one's been sick for 5 years. We're gonna wrap this up in a year. There's just no question about it. And here I am, 20 odd years later, and we are totally in a different space with our daughter. She's done absolutely amazingly over the past, I would say, 18 months. Just acknowledge and know that she's amazing, absolutely amazing.
I felt a lot of pressure to be skinnier than I was. I had grown up kind of a chubby child in school, and I just remember being teased a lot because I was quite large, and also being ostracized both by teachers and by students and classmates. And I decided to diet and lost a lot of weight and ended up in hospital. And I went back to school about a month later, and I had so much positive attention. That was a profound life experience because it really did say to me that people do judge you, they do accept you based on how you look. And that started anorexia for several years. And then I developed bulimia and struggled with that for many, many years, for over 20 years. My first memory of Sheena was just this gorgeous spirit who just really radiated so much light and super friendly, just a really beautiful spirit. And when I met Sheena, and after a little while, I could sort of see some telltale signs that said to me that maybe she had an eating disorder. And one day we found ourselves talking.
Lynn was my executive assistant at the time, and Lynn was a single mom, and Sheena had basically grown up within the Sun family. She came there after school to do homework, so we all knew her. And Lynn confided in me that she was really worried about Sheena and the weight she was losing, and couldn't get through to her to really find out what was going on. And that was the start of the road we went down to try to get help for her and to find out what the essence of her problem was.
I shared my story with her, and she opened up immediately and shared that she was struggling with an eating disorder. And therein started this close relationship for a while, where she said I was the first person and the only person with whom she could talk. It was comforting, but at times I was also the last person that she wanted to connect with because I knew her secret.
Eating disorders to me was something I'd read about, but I was nowhere near an expert. Where I became initially frustrated was when you work in media, you are able generally to pick up the phone and find help for whatever you need, or have someone tell you who else to call to get that help. And when we realized that Sheena had an eating disorder, there was nowhere for her to go in not just Toronto, but in general.
I was one of the many people that you all have been able to help. Many years ago, probably 2 decades ago, I stumbled upon your staircase, and I was received with open arms, where I attended workshops on body image that were facilitated by Zara Dahani, a brown woman of color, a queer woman, and someone who was fat and self-identified as fat. And for me, that was so crucial to walk into an establishment and see someone that, you know, had some familiarity to myself as a racialized young person at the time, you know, who could help me work through some of the issues I was having with my own negative body image, with my own self-esteem issues, with my problems with food, and really also just with my problems with navigating how I felt about my body.
I came here, I can't remember exactly, but it would be safe to say about 20 years ago as a client. And the first time I came, I was reticent. You know, it was hard for me to admit that I'd had an eating disorder, especially as a full-grown adult.
Our daughter started showing signs of an eating disorder in 1999. And I remember just being so desperate as to where can I go, what must we do, where do I go? And at the time, my husband was working downtown, and Google and the internet was very much in its infancy. And I remember he ran down to the National Eating Disorder Information Center, to NEDIC, to see what was available. And he came home with information about Sheena's place.
I was told Sheena's is a place that you could go. They don't ask you personal questions. They're strictly a support place. So I came to the yoga class. And at that time, the first yoga class, I walked in and I couldn't move. I was up against the wall. I was forced to face myself.
I had never heard of cognitive behavioral therapy before. The group, we did a lot of exercises with cognitive behavioral therapy, putting a lot of the skills into practice, and the repetition of those skills really helped me to get used to it and then also change my thought pattern. And I still use a lot of the exercises that we did even now, today, all these years later.
The teacher was very kind, and she just put a mat on the floor and she just said, well, just lie and be with us. That I could do. But then we had to stand against the wall and raise a leg, and I couldn't do it. I mean, it's not that I couldn't do it, I couldn't do it. So I burst out crying. It was so painfully cathartic. And again, everybody was so kind. But that broke through, and so I kept coming.
I mean, I was so scared coming into the building, and then I'd say after those 2 months of meeting the people in my group and then getting to know them, by the end I did feel like we were all on the same team. We were all like cheerleaders for each other, you know? It was so heartwarming, and really what you need, because I think a lot of the shame comes from isolation and feeling alone, and just the friends that I made out of that program, the support I felt, people rooting for you, like it really sort of turned my recovery around, and really helped me.
Being a client, recognizing something that was a personal challenge, almost like a spiritual challenge. Me and my eating disorder had a relationship. And we were going to combat it, and we were going to walk this earth together, but we were going to do it successfully. And then going from being a client to being a facilitator, it was a graduation that I don't know how many other people experienced such joyful, gracious gratitude.
And I just couldn't wait. I could not wait to get here from 1 week to the next. It saved my life. It saved our life. When my husband could join me at the parent groups in the evening, I think he also got a lot of his own questions answered, and also could feel that we were not alone. Families, I hope, can understand and realize that they're not alone.
Welcome everyone, my name is Marissa Roberto. My pronouns are she, her. I host a show called Digital Sports Center on TSN social channels and have been working in the video game space for many years now. Last year I was invited to host a panel discussing an eye-opening documentary by TSN feature producer Tracy Britnell, who I believe is in the audience right now, about athletes and eating disorders. I learned so much during that discussion, and I feel very honored to be here with you all tonight as we celebrate 25 years of Sheena's Place. For the last 25 years, Sheena's Place has operated on the traditional and unceded territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, Anishinaabe, Chippewa, Haudenosaunee, and Wendat peoples. While we are gathered here virtually this evening, it's important that we acknowledge the systemic violence that many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people have faced as a result of settler colonization, and that many still face today. As a charity providing support to those with body image issues and eating disorders, Sheena's Place acknowledges that First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people are often left out of body image and eating disorder spaces, including research, treatment, recovery spaces, and conversations surrounding stigma and support. It is our responsibility to work toward decolonizing these spaces and to create supportive environments for all folk who desire support. If you want to learn more about the ways that you can take action as an ally and learn about the land that you're residing on, check out the resources that Caitlin and Steve will post in the chat. Sheena's Place is the only community-based direct service that provides free, immediate mental health care in the Greater Toronto Area for people affected by eating disorders. Their work fills a critical gap in the healthcare system and in the mental health landscape with their unique group-based programs. Your financial support makes their crucial work possible. I actually received a wonderful note from Director of Development JP McMillan earlier this week saying that Sheena's Place now has a match for donations made up to $30,000 by the Jessen Newberger Charitable Foundation. That means that your donations will be going even further. In celebration of Sheena's Place tonight, we're going to be watching short videos and have discussions following them with individuals featured to expand on the themes presented. So with that being said, let's take a look at our video now.
Sheena's Place has been absolutely fabulous because what it's done is it's created a hub for people to be able to come as they need. They can come, they can go, and
it's different than walking into your doctor's office. It's different than going to a one-on-one therapy session. It's different than going to a hospital-based program. It is out of a house.
They know what they're going to get here. They're going to get hope and support. They're going to get informed and aware facilitators. They're going to get a very clear, structured approach to understanding that that they're okay, they're accepted for who and where they're at in terms of their recovery. They're not going to be judged, and as such, you can only imagine what it's like for people with eating disorders in the community where they're misunderstood.
Perhaps people feel less under a microscope when they're here because they feel like they're sitting in a living room. They're not sitting in an office. They're not in the therapy chair. They're here when we're all humans sitting together supporting each other.
I loved that it was a home, because that's how it made you feel, you know? You weren't walking into a sterile, institutional spot. You know, you were walking into a place that gave you that sense of being a community-based support.
I think we've had lots of participants say that just by this group existing, they feel like they can now see themselves in a recovery conversation. These are people who for years and years have had their experience but just never saw themselves represented in a mental health space.
I see like community blossoming in these groups. I see folks coming to Sheena's Place and all of a sudden having a space to talk about, you know, their transness and their eating disorder, like the chronic illness, the disability, and eating disorder experiences. And so often folks are like, I have nowhere else to talk about these intersections. I think having that community like allows people to actually engage with recovery in a way that's meaningful and actually be able to address more of the issues that are like actually relevant to why the eating disorder is going on in people's lives. Because we can actually address the transphobia, the ableism, the racism, the sexism that's happening in people's lives and really like impacting eating disorder stuff, behaviors, symptoms that like just isn't addressed in a lot of clinical programs.
We really, as an organization, value the individual experience of folks with eating disorders, the resilience that folks bring with them when they arrive here. We really try to interact with folks without judgment, and we really value community. The opportunity for folks to connect with us and to connect with each other is such a key ingredient to the work that's being done here.
To reach as many individuals that are struggling with eating disorders as possible, and I think Sheena does an absolutely remarkable job, both at reaching out to those individuals that are struggling and also the programming that is done within this organization.
My name is Kelsey Johnston, and I'm the program manager at Sheena's Place and also one of our group facilitators. We've been around for 25 years, and obviously there's been lots of change in that time, but I think one of the things that seems to have always been a really important piece is the community, getting feedback from the community, incorporating community needs into decision making. We care about our community members, we care about inclusion, and as much as we try to offer, folks also offer when they come to our space, they offer support and compassion to each other.
Zach Grit, group facilitator at Sheena's Place, a registered social worker. So I first kind of got involved in eating disorder communities because I was experiencing my own eating disorder. And I found it like kind of challenging to navigate that outside of like formal like supports in hospitals. I had joined a lot of online forums for like trans folks with eating disorders when I was looking for support. I kept noticing folks, like trans folks, saying, where are the supports for us? Like, where are the resources? And so I contacted Sheena's Place and said, hey, I have this idea for this like trans non-binary gender questioning support group. Would you folks be open to me facilitating that? And luckily they were really on board with that and said it was something that they had been receiving requests for. They wanted a trans facilitator, someone who understood eating disorders, someone who had, who was a social worker or a clinician of some sort.
For about the last 15 years, I've been running an evening group for caregivers of people with eating disorders. The group is fantastic. People come on behalf of themselves and their loved ones. The group is best run when there's like 20 people max in the group because people's needs can't be heard and addressed.
We started with a workshop in summer 2019 called What's Color Got to Do With It? Exploring Racism and Shadeism in terms of an eating disorder experience. And when we came, the participants were lovely. All of them were like, could this be an ongoing support group? And in June 2020, when I think the conversation around social justice and race and identity and mental health was at its highest that it's been, at least in our like North American context, we were like, even though it's a global pandemic, just given the stress that this community is under, maybe this is the time that we do something about it. It's the only right now BIPOC support group in Canada for people of color, or Black or Indigenous, to have a space to talk about their eating disorder experience and how it intersects with their mental health.
I'm John Choi, the Executive Director at Sheena's Place. When I was being interviewed for the position, the pandemic was early on, and the organization was starting to make the shift to online services. There's an even a greater focus on trying to increase accessibility for a broader range of individuals to access services.
One of the things that's happened as a result of COVID and our groups having to move online, the Family, Friends, and Partners Support Group, we now have people coming from all over Ontario.
One of our long-term goals was being able to offer some programs online, and so COVID was kind of the catalyst for getting that project underway. So we've expanded our groups, and it's been a great opportunity to reach other people that we wouldn't have been able to reach before through in-person groups at our physical location.
In EDA, Eating Disorders Awareness Week 2019, the theme was Eating Disorders Can't Afford to Wait. And when you think about how the pandemic has impacted people's understanding of eating disorders and the way they're impacted by them, I feel like we've only seen those gaps become earthquakes, where those who are most vulnerable have often been impacted the most by it. And so to think about whether support is actually changing for communities is a bigger question where we have to tease out these systemic constructs from this.
We also know that eating disorders and eating problems are inextricably linked to social inequity, and people's experiences of violence and food insecurity and housing insecurity and, lack of access to education. Places like Sheena's Place are just really important because those are the kinds of issues that you all are willing and able to talk about. And I think that for people who are at a stage where they may not be able to subscribe to a hospital, they may not be able to subscribe to an institution in that sense, this is also an opportunity for them to get well-meaning support that is also rooted in research.
I would say that we've seen an increase in acceptance of mental health disorders as health concerns over the past maybe couple of decades. There's just a broader acceptance that mental health is a concern for literally everybody. There are certain aspects of mental health or certain disorders that have traditionally been sort of less attended to, and eating disorders would absolutely fall in that category. The conditions surrounding the pandemic have really sort of accentuated the risks that folks are maybe facing.
On February 1st, when I held, Ontario's first eating disorders roundtable, because my Bill 61 had passed, a bill which granted was a start, and really just about getting awareness, raising awareness, having something on the books, quite frankly, so that whether it's me in future years or another MPP in my seat in future years or anybody in the legislature can go back and say, in 2020, on December 8th, Ontario took eating disorders seriously, and now we can build.
Please welcome to the stage our panelists. Hello, Margaret. Hello, Wendy. How are you?
Well, thank you. Very good, thank you.
Good, good. I'm hoping before we get into our questions here, if you can both tell me a little bit more about yourselves and how you got involved with Sheena's Place. Margaret, we'll start with you.
My background is I'm an occupational therapist and psychotherapist. And occupational therapists, we're kind of obsessed with the quality of lived everyday life and functioning. And so in the 90s, when I was working with people who were coming out of treatment, I talked to them, I was finding that they were struggling to understand how to take on the task of everyday life. So I went to Sheena's Place and I proposed a group called Taking Charge of My Life. And that's how I first became involved with Sheena Place in the late 90s.
Amazing. Wendy?
Mm-hmm.
Hi, everybody. I became involved with Sheena's Place when our daughter first got sick with her eating disorder, and I really had no idea where to go or who to turn to. So at the time, Google and the internet was very much in its infancy, and my husband charged downtown to NEDIC, the National Eating Disorder Information Center, and brought home information about Sheena's Place. And I can honestly say that this was in 1999, that Sheena's Place truly saved my life, because I just could not wait to get down to the groups for moms from one week to the next.
And your husband joined you as well, right?
Yes, he used to come to the evening groups as well, when they had groups for couples or parents or caregivers.
Mm-hmm. I love hearing that. Before we get into the questions that I have for you, I just want to let the audience know that you're welcome to submit your own questions if you have them, just in the chat there, and we will do our best to facilitate those. For you both today, I wanted to ask, and Margaret, we'll have you answer first, what's the biggest change you've seen in the eating disorders field since you first became involved?
Oh, there's been massive change. When I first started, if we were to look at the books that are being written on the subject of what eating disorders were about, they were largely focused on people with anorexia nervosa, young females, and their troubled relationship with their mothers. Mm-hmm. So that's what was going on kind of in the 80s and the 90s. And since then, our whole understanding of what constitutes an eating disorder has completely broadened. So from that narrow focus of just young teenage girls, we're now looking at the impact of people who are addicted to exercise, people who are addicted to healthy eating, people who are doing bodybuilding, people who have backgrounds with anxiety, depression. Over 60 to 80% of people with eating disorders struggle with underlying anxiety or depression issues. People have uncontrollable life events where they'll start to use eating as a way to kind of focus in on something that is manageable for them. Lots of people have been bullied or they're trauma survivors. The impact of transphobia and homophobia, racism, and but not least, social media. There's the work of Dr. Ann Becker from Harvard. She's a psychiatrist and ethnographer, and she's done very, very good work to demonstrate the incredible sharp rise in eating disorders since the onset of social media.
Man, yeah, I definitely feel that, especially with social media now. You think that it would get better, but as more platforms are introduced, I feel like the worse it's getting, especially now with TikTok. I will not go into my problems with TikTok at the moment. I'll jump into it now. Wendy, if you can let me know what the biggest change you've seen might be.
Well, I think our daughter has been struggling, and I have to just say that right now she's doing amazingly. But I think in the beginning, when we first started in 1999, and when I think what was available and what is available now, and the awareness and the understanding has definitely gone to different levels. As a result of our daughter being sick, I did start out my own not-for-profit organization to also raise awareness, understanding, and action as to what was happening in the eating disorder landscape in Ontario and across the country. So I have seen a huge level of increase in awareness. And also in the very beginning, when our daughter first got sick, I was quite shocked at how little eating disorders were included around influential mental health organizations. And so now it has happened, what I feel is that people are now reaching out and asking for advice and for caregivers and lived experience to be part of decision makers and policy makers. So I think, without the caregivers or the lived experience voice at these tables, decisions can really become meaningless and empty without the lived experience voice. So I've also seen, I know that with social media and also with our organizations all collaborating with each other in Ontario, it's also an amazing, amazing opportunity for us not to reinvent the wheel.
Yes.
Learning from each other what each organization is doing. And there's been a big shift, and I know that we all know from COVID, what it has certainly done to the landscape and more prevalent eating disorders have become since COVID.
I want to acknowledge Jill, who has just joined us. Jill, hello, how are you?
How are you? Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Good, we're so happy to have you. If you could just give us a brief introduction, who you are and how you got involved with Sheena's Place, that'd be amazing.
Most certainly. Well, first of all, I'd like to say congratulations and just a huge thank you to Sheena's Place for 25 years of service. And I could only wish you many, many, many more years. I mean, of course, in a perfect ideal world, we might wish to eradicate eating disorders and body image issues, but the reality is they're still here. They're still here, and we need community-based resources that literally help people find a home, literally help people reconnect with their body consciousness in a way that's so necessary, especially when institutionalized care is far and few in between in terms of accessibility, in terms of lack of beds. I could go on and on and on. That said, I'm MPP Jill Andrew for Toronto St. Paul's, a member of the NDP official opposition, women's issues critic, culture critic, and heritage critic, and also someone who has firsthand experience at Sheena's Place. I was a client a couple decades ago, quite frankly, and what I enjoyed about being at Sheena's Place was the fact that you could walk in and have real talk, engage with counselors, with supports, with programming that not only was community-based, but led by members of the community, who had their own experiences in some cases with EDs and other body image issues. So I'm very glad to be here this evening for this short time. Thank you.
Yeah, Wendy was just saying how beneficial it was for her family as well. We heard in the video last year that Bill 61 passed, officially recognizing Eating Disorders Awareness Week in Ontario. So for all of you, and I will start with Jill, what do you think the role of the government should be with the eating disorder community at large?
Thank you so much for that question. Yes, Bill 61, my first private member's bill, it passed back in 2020. But I have to say that it would not have passed, quite frankly, without the support, of the needs in the world, the Netics in the world, the Sheena's Places, Banna's, Body Brave, you all and so many others are the ones who have truly been championing on the ground for decades again. I want to make it always clear that this issue has not, simply made itself known since I was elected or any of us MPPs in the House right now. This has been going on for decades. So I was very glad to be able to put forth my Bill 61 to have it pass, recognizing the first week in February as Eating Disorders Awareness Week, and recognizing that this is a bill that really tries to express to the government the need for us to raise awareness, first of all, about eating disorders, the need for us to, address the social and systemic stigmas that still operate for those who are accessing help, or trying to access help, the need for prevention. As the old saying goes, prevention's better than cure, right? Whether it's looking at curricular shifts, whether it's looking at, healthcare shifts, we know, sadly, our healthcare system has been chronically underfunded for many years. And this has a direct impact, to whether or not people are able to source resources in their community. Publicly funded resources. I can't tell you how many folks I've spoken to right here in St. Paul's across all political lines, because let me tell you, eating disorders don't discriminate. They don't discriminate. And I have spoken to NDPers, to Liberals, to Greens, to PCs, to people who have no political affiliations. And everyone agrees that we need more happening in Ontario so that, especially our young folks don't have to travel to the States to get services, or that you don't have to be a family, that has 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 or $60,000 to spend for critical care that is life-saving. I mean, we're talking about, the worst, next to probably the opioids and addictions, the worst of mental health illnesses, that we are facing, that millions are facing across our nation, over half 500,000 or so right here in Ontario. We need all the support we can get. And I would be remiss if I didn't plug the Canadian Eating Disorder Strategy. I know that this is a plan that's going from 2019 to 2029. I cannot emphasize enough that this plan literally provides a framework. It provides a framework, quite frankly, for each and every one of us in decision-making, quote unquote, positions, whether in government, provincially, federally, municipally, school trustees, all of us, we need to be focusing on those 6 pillars, prevention, public education and awareness, treatment, and we know that treatment is already stifled for many in Northern Territories, rural and Indigenous communities. We need caregiver support. It was frankly need that really opened my eyes to the economic costs to caregivers, of not having supports, and of course training and research. There's dozens of recommendations in that strategy, and we certainly could do very well with a strategy in Ontario, with a strategy across our nation. And my bill, is a starting point. It's a place for us to engage meaningfully and courageously, but it can't only be talk. We need action, because quite frankly, people are dying. And with the pandemic, we have seen a lot of folks not be able to get the services they need because we had closures that just dually, if not triply, tripled the weight on families, on people surviving and trying to navigate EDs in our communities. And we just have to do better for them, because it is a matter of life and death.
Well, speaking of families, I want to toss it to you, Wendy, because obviously we have someone at a parliament level, at a government level, who we know, thankfully, is working on something like this, something to help our communities. But on a family level, what do you think is being done, or what can be addressed with these issues, and what else needs to happen?
I think one of the big things that also needs to happen are, especially in Ontario, are billing codes for eating disorders. And the tracking and the data, because without proper billing codes, which does not happen right now, it's very difficult for any proper data system to take place and to track the numbers that are so needed. When people ask us, well, what are the numbers like? It's a bit of a guessing game, because none of the provinces are actually doing the same thing and have the same standard for billing codes. I think another issue that Jill has also mentioned is support, more support for those families that are so desperate for help for their loved ones. I get phone calls and emails all the time from families who are absolutely desperate. I heard of the most shocking story just today that is unimaginable. It would never happen with a physical illness. So why do eating disorders have to be so discriminated against in the mental health care system? And I've heard it from doctors, I've heard it from experts that eating disorders are at the bottom of the mental health totem pole. When you look at research, how much is being done and how much research is paid for eating disorders versus another mental health illness, which is very rightly deserving of research, eating disorders are really at the bottom of the totem pole. And I think another big issue is accountability. The government is saying they are giving money, then give it and make sure that it's given to the right place and for eating disorders. Over the years, the doctors talking about, or the government's talking about, money did go to eating disorders. But when you talk to the frontline people who are running the programs, the money did not trickle down to them. I really think it's time to step it up, to increase accountability. And if it's not working where you are, take it away. I think.
Right. More to go with the word service, execution as well. So important.
Yeah.
Margaret, so what do you think the role of government should be with the eating disorder community at large?
Well, I really appreciate what Jill and Wendy have discussed. For me as a clinician, I'm hearing directly from individuals with eating disorders. And they come from all different walks of life, and they're not really being asked. I would like to know if it'd be possible to put together, and you're all going to roll your eyes, a task force, which would include people who have recovered from eating disorders, people who are still struggling with the eating disorders, family members. I have never been asked as a frontline worker what I think would be important to do. I don't know if we're ever tapped for this. And the task force should look at having a much broader range of services and avenues for people who are struggling with eating disorders. Most really don't want to even go near the healthcare system. So what else is available for them? We have to be far more creative. And the other thing is eating disorders, if they've been around for a while, they're kind of like a learned behavior, in as much as we all know about that concept of neuroplasticity. Neurons that fire together, wire together. So the longer someone is engaging in eating disorder behavior as a coping strategy, to help them deal with challenging situations, the more difficult it will be for them to unlearn the behavior. And so we need treatment facilities, we need opportunities in the community, we need all sorts of services that give people the time to literally experience their reality, their lived existence, separate from engaging in the eating disorder. I have a client that has just come back from Italy, where she was at a 3-year addictions eating disorder facility in a self-sustaining community with 1,500 people. It took her 3 years of living completely free of access to substances and eating disorder behavior possibilities for her to finally unlearn the eating disorder. So this 2 months in hospital, this 3 months here, And, anybody I talk to, the relapse, the slipping, and it's just a very expensive roller coaster for our loved ones with eating disorders. And their lives are held hostage by the tyranny of the eating disorder for decades, and it's unacceptable. Bright, lovely, wonderful people. And we need to have everybody on this task force from all different races, sexual orientations, gender, the whole bit, to get their perspective, because there's lots of people that are in fact not being included in the conversation about what they need for recovery.
Well said.
Wow.
Jill, as mentioned in the video, systemic issues like food insecurity influence a person's risk of developing an eating disorder. And of course, Margaret was just touching on that. What is being done to address these issues, and what else needs to happen?
Thank you so much for the question. And before I jump onto that, I just wanted to echo what Wendy had said with regards to the billing codes. Okay. This is something that I absolutely heard from not only health providers, but even clients, quite frankly. And I wanted to share a quote from one of the doctors, Dr. Mamalidi, a psychiatrist with CAMH, Thompson Medical Center, and the Ontario Medical Association Psychiatric Section Chair at the time. This was back in February of this year, actually. I wanted to share, as a psychiatrist, I cannot emphasize more the devastation that eating disorders bring to our patients and their families' lives daily, and the burden in their life. Yet eating disorders are often invisible in recognition as a serious medical condition. With such limited funding for treatment and access to multidisciplinary teams in Ontario, invisible assessments by various healthcare providers, including physicians, invisible on our medical curriculum, invisible in OHIP billing codes, as there's no billing code for this deadliest psychiatric condition, invisible when seeing BIPOC patients and immigrants, invisible in understanding that these eating disorders are a lifespan condition. I think that really highlights that issue of how important it is not only to have access, but to have access that is culturally relevant, that recognizes that people are dealing with disorders in a multitude of ways, and a one approach for all simply is not the way forward. I thank you for asking about food insecurity as well, too. What I will say quickly on that, when was it? Was it last year or earlier this year? I tell you, with the pandemic, sometimes things bleed together. I had actually put forth a motion to the provincial government, which, of course, because of the prorogation of the House with the federal election, died. But I will be looking at putting forth newer, reimagined legislation that, in the opinion of the House, the government of Ontario should create a provincial food strategy that includes affirmation of access to food inclusive of fresh fruits and vegetables as a human right, and culturally and regionally addresses marginal, moderate, and severe food insecurity for all Ontarians, including seniors, ODSP, OW recipients, BIPOC, artists, 2S LGBTQIA plus communities, fixed or low-income households, especially seniors, sole parent families, persons with disabilities, injured workers who have been disproportionately impacted by COVID-19 and the social determinants of health in general. The one thing I would say, is not only do we have to shift the diet culture narrative that we often have in all of our workplaces, where we bully people or shame people based on what they choose to eat. That is something that we need to shift. But we also have to have things like a living minimum wage. We have to have things like access to good housing, all of these foundational pieces that allow people to have self-confidence, to have a sense of dignity and pride in their skin, so that they're not more likely to act out the oppressions and the systemic barriers that they're feeling through controlling of their bodies, or through any other pathologizing way in which, we know eating disorders are sometimes responses to those very real sociocultural inequities. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say, you know, from a green perspective, from an environmental justice perspective, which of course food insecurity is inextricably linked to, you know, we have a government now that, you know, has abused their ministry zoning orders. And in case anyone doesn't know, ministry zoning orders are pretty much, the government's way of overriding municipal decisions on development. And to bring this back to the body, when we override, you know, when the provincial government overrides or should I say abuses their MZOs, when the government, you know, paves over the greenbelt and farmland and our wetlands and our natural spaces, that literally takes away farmers' opportunities to provide us with locally grown foods that are healthy, that are nutritious. So realize that from this big systemic issue of, you know, the green belt and overdevelopment and all of that, it has a very individual impact on our bodies. And therefore, what we're able to eat, what we're able to access, and sadly, what we're not able to access. I think every ministry in our government, across levels of government, has a role to play to ensure that we're not only looking at eating disorders from a mental health and addictions perspective, but that we're looking at eating disorders, you know, through curricular connections, through the Ministry of Education, through colleges and universities, through labor, for instance. You know, when people are sick, they need to be able to stay home. When you have an ED, there are all kinds of physical and mental consequences that can come with that. And you need to be able to stay home and heal and access counseling that is publicly funded, that you can afford, that you can get access to without having to worry about, you know, losing your rent or your mortgage or, ironically, access to food.
Margaret, Wendy, Jill, this has been incredible. Thank you so much for your time and insight. I am sad that our panel has to come to an end now, but we are going to continue with the final part of Sheena's Place 25th Anniversary Series, again, followed by discussion. Thank you so much. Now, let's take a look.
When we started Sheena's Place, we couldn't have imagined what it would have become, and it's become everything we envisioned and so much more. And it's exciting to see the contribution and the impact that it's made. And unfortunately, there's still so much more that needs to be done. I've always felt that the best day for Sheena's Place is going to be the day that we close the doors, because there will be no more need for Sheena's Place. But in the meantime, thanks to everybody who continues to make the home what it is. It really does take a village, and we've still got a lot of work to do.
I think the biggest impact of Sheena's Place is it existing and it continuing to persist despite the challenges that we've all faced over the last 18 months and probably Sheena's Place has faced over the last 25 years of its existence.
We've always just thought that there should be a Sheena's Place in every town across the country. I mean, it's just like, this place is gold. I'm just so grateful that it does exist for people that can benefit from the groups.
When I get to do some work looking across the country, I really wish that there was a Sheena's Place in all communities. One where there's an organization that has a really specific goal and mission and vision for what it wants to do and fills a really important need of providing as low of a barrier of support as it can towards people accessing it.
Sheena's offered me physical support, creative support, mental support, and I could do it in a legitimate place that was specific for eating disorders. So that was helpful, that it was specific.
I know that Sheena's Place won't be the support for everyone, but I think it can be a support for someone over the course of their journey, and importantly build community in a way that they might not be able to receive in an individual kind of setting or in a societal setting. Like Sheena's Place, sometimes our groups are almost like a microcosm of society where we get to cheerlead someone as they navigate through a battle that they now want to bring into their life.
I wish I could tell my younger self that, you know, you're not alone in your experience, because there are so many people who feel the same way. And what Sheena's place did for me, actually, it really validated my experience, because when you're isolated in your own head, you have the disorder, and then you start beating yourself up for having, oh my God, like I'm not normal. Why do I think like this? I must be the only person in the world who feels like this. And when I came to the class, you know, people would be talking, and then I would look and I would be like, I'd be nodding like, it's like they're reading my mind. Like, I know exactly how that feels. I can totally feel what you're feeling, and it is normal to have doubts, and it is normal to have these thoughts. So many people share that experience.
But my heart aches for the people who need support, who are not even too far outside of Toronto, never mind outside of Ontario, you know, in the far corners of our country. And they suffer in silence, in isolation, because you feel alone in the madness and the isolation and the self-harm and the self-hate.
So if there could be a Sheena's Place, or even an organization like Sheena's Place, that maybe we can support getting there, that is available to each and every Canadian across from our east to west coast, you know, that would be something that would benefit every community in our country. So while we've made some nice strides this past year, increasing accessibility across this province, I think that there are still many communities that aren't aware that we exist and are limited in accessing our services for a variety of reasons. It would be wonderful if we can continue to grow and build so that accessibility is there, and then maybe even beyond our provincial borders. I think that would be a nice ideal to aspire to.
I want to see us become more accessible. I want to see more groups pop up, you know, and I'd like us to be able to work with more folks across Canada. Because we've seen folks try and access our programming who don't live in Ontario, and it sucks to have to turn them away. I'd like to see way more demographic specific programming, because I think it's just a start. And when you start, I think when an organization starts providing like demographic specific groups, I think they have a responsibility to like keep up with that and like actually meet the needs of those populations, but also see who's being left out of those groups.
Another thing that we can do is expand our programming to reach beyond the city of Toronto, beyond the province of Ontario. I'd love to see Sheena's type programming as a national program.
One thing I've hoped to see Sheena's Place do at some point is to offer 24/7, 365 support on a national basis. And I know that's a big beast, costs a lot of money, takes a lot of time, resources to train people and to keep that service supported. But the work that's been done in Toronto by Sheena's Place is fantastic, phenomenal.
I think that you know, the push to increase the accessibility of our services and our supports to a broader number of people is such an important initiative. Offering demographic specific groups is one of the ways to reducing barriers to access that folks who have been underserved are facing, and a better way of increasing accessibility. So going online by virtue of not requiring somebody to physically come into our space is one of the initiatives that we were forced to take. But moving forward, continuing to offer online services when things return to sort of more normal circumstances, and having a hybrid approach to programming where we have some services in the house and some services available to people that are farther away or can't access the physical space for different reasons is an ongoing piece of work that we'll attend to.
I think Sheena's Place is a pillar in the community, and I'd like for us to become a place where we're able to diversify both the facilitators and the kind of support that we can provide through mentoring the next generation of people and group members to go out into the world. I think Sheena's Place has a really wonderful foundation that allows us to potentially be a place where new therapists, new facilitators, new trainees can come in and learn about eating disorders in a safe environment to use their experience here to now go and deliver eating disorder sensitive support to a community that really needs it. There's such a lack of eating disorder informed services out there. It's more so the philosophy and the values of Sheena's Place that I think our clients really, really relate to. And I'd hope for us to become a pillar of mentorship for the next 25 years.
So there are a number of underserved communities right now, and I have no idea how we would access them, but the bodybuilding community is full of people abusing various steroid substances and or so-called healthy eating behaviors and over-exercise. And I think that there's a lot of evidence about the detrimental effects of this particular way of being in the world has on these individuals and their family members in the workplace. So that would be an area I think we should really look into. Also of concern for me that I hear a lot of is a lot more evidence of what we could call orthorexia, which is people who are doing so-called clean eating, where their entire lives almost become completely consumed by getting foods that are the best and this and that. And really, you know, the body is not that discriminating. The body simply just needs fuel and micronutrients. And clean eating leads to restrictive choices, which leads to narrowing of food options, which leads often to nutritional deficits.
I know that probably having more middle-aged, elderly support groups, even senior support, right? Because I think some of the feedback I've heard is from older folks that access our programming. They feel like very old in comparison to a lot of the younger folks who feel very comfortable accessing this space and need this space, but there are a lot of populations who also need this space and it's not quite meeting their needs, or it's there are folks who still aren't accessing the sport because they don't see themselves in it, or something's lacking.
There's an increasing amount of research on food insecurity and the intersection of that with eating disorders, so I would love to see if we could work towards supporting folks who are experiencing food insecurity and an eating disorder in some way, whether that's, partnering with a food bank or developing a program of our own, because that's a really important intersection that I think often isn't addressed when we're serving people or supporting people who have eating disorders or experiences of disordered eating. If you go to a treatment program and meals are provided and then you step out the door and you're not able to keep up your meal plan because you can't afford food, then that's a massive challenge in terms of accessing recovery and being able to maintain the goals that you're working towards. So it can be a huge barrier for folks to work towards their recovery goals if they don't have access to nutritional food.
I think people can really explore and identify their own biases when it comes to food, weight, and shape, and the way in which that may be impacting how they're interacting with people in their life. That might mean minding your own body, mind your own business, mind your own body. If you have a critical comment, it might just be good to keep that to yourself, or it might be a you thing to keep to yourself, because sometimes how we're interacting with the world is a reflection of ourselves.
And I think there are other ways that folks can engage in recovery that doesn't necessarily look like a hospital or something like that. And so I think we also need to really think about how we think about recovery and what being willing to fund things that are shown to work in ways that are different than I think we're just doing now, because I think there's a lot of gaps in the systems and it's failing folks, and folks are dying.
I think there's a really big range of different things folks can do. I think at one end, if folks have an interest or even the slightest amount of passion or concern, that advocacy with their elected officials can be really helpful, and to connect with their MPP as the province is responsible for the health system, and just let them know that they're concerned and encourage their MPPs to learn more, because really there's a lack of awareness on all levels, and that includes our politicians.
I wish that people knew that it really isn't a choice. This is something that we talk about often, and in groups all the time I hear folks sharing, what is said to them when they disclose their eating disorder, and often it's like, well, just eat, just get over it, you're too sensitive. I can't tell you how many times I've heard those things, and that's not the case. This is a serious situation, and people need help and they need support, and that may go beyond supporting themselves, and that's okay. So I think the general public needs to have more knowledge around eating disorders, more empathy, that it is a significant challenge and something that people can overcome, but that support and empathy are really important along that journey. And so if somebody discloses to you that they have an eating disorder, be non-judgmental, educate yourself, and do what you can to support.
Please welcome to the stage Ari, Jeffrey, and Adam. Welcome, welcome. I want to do the same thing with you gentlemen as the previous panel. I want to learn more about you before we get into some questions here. So Ari, let's start with you.
Cool. Hi, everyone. My name is Ari Maharaj. I use he, him pronouns. I am honored to co-facilitate free group-based support for Black folks, for Indigenous folks, and for people of color experiencing disordered eating at Sheena's Place. It's a group practice from a place of cultural humility and really aiming to provide folks breathing room to unpack their relationship with food or eating or their bodies or exercise or their relationship with health, while also recognizing the impact of systemic injustices on mental health. And I'm really glad and want to thank publicly Kelsey, the program manager at Sheena's Place, for bringing this on and really advocating for having programming specific to BIPOC folks at Sheena's Place. I think it's a change, and I'm really excited to be here.
Good to meet you, Ari. Jeffrey?
Hi, everyone. My name is Jeffrey Soto. My pronouns are he, him. I'm a former participant at Sheena's Place. I was there in 2015 and really helped me to get myself on the road to recovery. Since then, I've been in recovery now for about 5 or 6 years now. Since then, I've become a peer mentor at an organization called Eating Disorders Nova Scotia, and we do peer mentoring all over the country. As well, I published a book about my experiences in 2019 called Cloud Cover. It's about mental health, but it's specific on eating disorders, and just sharing my story on platforms like this, and really, really happy to be here.
Well, just quickly, where can we find your book?
Oh, thanks. It's on Amazon and Indigo online.
Okay, amazing. Adam.
Thanks so much, Marissa, and thank you, Jeffrey and Ari, for sharing a little bit about yourself. My name is Adam Jessen, and I've been involved with Sheena's Place since about 2017. I've known about the organization for a lot longer. I've had some very close friends and family members specifically that have struggled with eating disorders in the past. And one family member mentioned to me, I remember at the time, this is probably over 10 years ago, they said, hospital treatment, in-hospital treatment, and counseling, psychotherapy, of everything that I did, the one place that really made a drastic impact on my recovery was Sheena's place. Mm-hmm. And that really stuck with me for many, many years. And then I happened to get involved more directly with Sheena's place in 2017. I joined the board in 2018, and I've been on the board ever since. And I'm really, really proud to be a part of such an incredible organization that does such vitally important work in the community for individuals that are struggling with eating disorders and their families. And I want to thank Jeffrey for sharing your story and Ari for facilitating. And thank you so much for being on this panel with me. And thank you, Marissa, for hosting.
Hey, I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to meet all of you and hear your stories. Before we jump into the questions I have for you, just want to remind the audience, you're welcome to submit questions. You're welcome to just jump into chat and shoot a question to whoever or everyone. You're welcome to do that. So I want to start with Ari and Adam. Based on the current landscape of eating disorder care, what do you think our sector is doing well? I'll start with you, Ari.
Yeah, I think I really love how community-based organizations like eating disorders, like Sheena's Place, has taken charge. I think the COVID-19 pandemic, as you heard our last panel talk about, has really exacerbated fault lines that have existed in the system for a really long time. And while Sheena's Place and other community-based mental health organizations have had a lack of sustainable funding, I think the ground-up energy that we've had has allowed for flexibility for us to meet clients where we're at. I'm really excited about virtual care as an opportunity, and I'm still amazed that in March 2020, when the world had to go online, how quick we were able to do it and the ways in which it's expanded my relationship with my clients. The group that Alexandra, my co-facilitator, and I run at Sheena's Place, the BIPOC support group, has always been online. It's never been something that's been in the house, and it started in June 2020. And just the deepening of the relationships that we were able to do with our clients, the ways that we're able to take advantage of a platform like Zoom for healthcare to have sidebar conversations, to check in on people, to have debriefs, to hang tight and have breakout rooms. Those are all things that aren't always possible in an in-person space. And I think it's something that I hope really continues to be part of the programming post in-person world comes back in whatever way that is. Lastly, I think I'm really excited on the ways in which folks with lived experience have leadership roles in our sector. Whether it's patient-oriented research, whether it's folks who are staff, whether it's co-facilitators. I think Sheena's Place has been a leader in being able to have ground-up programming that involves people with lived experience directly in the work. And I think I'm proud to be a part of an organization that's doing that and really setting a trail across the field of having a bunch of other Sheena's Places come up across Canada that are able to meet care of clients in their community.
Yeah, and I think it'll be so interesting, like the stories that will be so different and shift for you once you go from the Zoom life, Zoom meetings to actual real life conversations. And I haven't even met you people. I haven't even met anyone in real life yet. I've been loving these conversations so much. I can't wait to actually get to have them in person once again. Adam, what do you think our sector is doing so well?
Thanks, Ari. I thought your answer was really, really poignant and terrific. I want to expand on it a little bit. What do I think our sector is doing particularly well? Well, first of all, I think Margaret in the last panel touched on, how far awareness about eating disorders have come over the last several decades. I mean, like 20, 30 years ago, Margaret was saying that the individuals, that she was dealing with and the people that, the perception around eating disorders was that they happen to people that identify as women, they happen to, young people, and it was specifically anorexia or mainly anorexia. Whereas now we have so much more knowledge about what eating disorders are, how many different types of eating disorders there are, how each individual experiences eating disorders differently, how it is indiscriminate in who it affects and who it impacts and how it impacts these individuals. So I think that we've come in our sector and in our space, we've come a really long way over the last several decades and several years specifically. Another thing that I think we've done, what COVID-19, we were not able to do in-person sessions anymore, but what we were able to do is get rid of barriers to access, several barriers to access, for example, geographic barriers to access. And as a result of pivoting to online, which our staff and facilitators did an incredible job of doing, we were able to reach out to individuals across Ontario that wouldn't necessarily have been able to attend a session at Sheena's Place, people all over the remote places of the of the province. Of course, there are still those that presents a different barrier to access, and that's access to technology and a safe space in which to be able to participate in a Zoom meeting. But I think that's one thing that it creates an opportunity and also creates a set of challenges. I think another thing that we've done is we've been able to reach out to different types of communities. We've been able to, Ari hosts or facilitates rather, a group for BIPOC individuals that are struggling with eating disorders. And it's so important, vitally important, in fact, that we're able to reach the BIPOC community, that we're able to reach the LGBTQ community, and that we're able to, as Ari said, meet them where they're meet everyone where we're at. And I think that what you said about individuals with lived experience being in leadership roles is exceptionally poignant as well. But I think Sheena's place specifically and the space in general has done a really exceptional job. But we've got we've got more to go, more ground to cover, and I'm looking forward to the challenges that presents in the future.
Well, speaking of the future, I want to direct this question out to Jeffrey and Ari. How do you see eating disorder care changing in the future, just given what you know and what's been going on now? Jeffrey, I'll start with you.
Sure, thanks.
Sorry.
Yeah, well, just as Ari and Adam had mentioned before, like when I came to Sheena's place, I remember I hadn't heard of it before. I came upon Sheena's place from my family doctor, and I hadn't heard of it before. And when I joined as well, the course that I joined, it was I believe it was called Self and Body Image, and there were no courses back then that were specifically targeted to the LGBT community and the BIPOC community. And knowing back then, I'm also part of both communities as well. And I think when I first joined that first course, I remember feeling I was really overwhelmed, and I was quite scared before I came in. Of course, like it's new and everything, and it turned out amazing, I have to say. But just that first, the fact that they now cater to those specific communities, I think it's going to make it so much more easier for someone like myself who was quite hesitant to join before to seek help. And and it's great as well. And even like now, that we were talking about virtual, doing things virtually, because I remember going into the room and I was pretty terrified of like walking into the house and everything. Luckily though, as I said in my video, somebody offered me tea to make me a tea as soon as I walked in the house. So that like totally took the edge off. But like, if I had the option now to start virtually, I think I probably would take that, because it just it eases you in, as opposed to being there in person, then everybody's there. So just the fact that that Sheena's Place has been able to do all this great outreach to specific groups is so encouraging. And it's great. And the fact too that virtual is so accessible, like 24/7. I can see that happening in the future as well. Like it's very, very hopeful. And I do a lot of I do peer mentoring for eating disorders Nova Scotia, and we do peer mentoring. Like I speak with somebody in BC, and I also speak with somebody in Nova Scotia. And just the fact that we can do that, coast to coast, it's amazing what can be done virtually.
To add on to Jeffrey's point, I feel like we're able to see people as whole people now, that folks aren't just their eating disorder. And I think it's really important that we continue to create spaces where there are entire groups where we might not talk about an eating disorder symptom at all in the group, but is that care benefiting them? I think so, because I think all of these things are interconnected. And I'm excited for the ways in which we're now going to be able to hopefully grow support, with maybe some of your support in the audience, around being able to meet people's needs. If someone needs to join a group from home and from their bed, if that's where they're comfortable, they're able to do that. If people really want that comfy home-based environment where they can get a tea and come in and join a group, we're able to do that. I think in addition, being able to connect to issues related to the social determinants of health, I think you heard the last panel really talk about food security and housing as access issues. And I know the community education team on Sheena's Place's side, led by Hayden Axelrod, has really done work to create webinars and content and presentations that also gear to that, just to expand the folks who see themselves represented within the eating disorder conversation. I think fundamentally, until the world can be safe, it's important for us to have spaces for us to feel that safety. And I think we can create more spaces where folks, instead of using that time to defend themselves, they can use that time to define themselves. And I think I'm excited for all of us here to potentially be a part of that change.
Ooh, I love that line so much.
Me too.
That's great. Yeah, that was wonderful. Thank you so much for that. Adam, I'm sorry, I left you out of that question, but did you want to join in? Give me what you know now.
Just reeling from that last quote and statement, Ari, that was really, really powerful and poignant. So yeah, I'm just sort of like thinking about that. But thank you for all this to think on. Well, can you? What that line again? It was
give it to us one more time.
Oh, I'm like a really terrible human at repeating things that are said, but fundamentally, I think what I was mentioning was like, and I think Sheena's place, I think what we do really well is creating spaces for people to feel that safety. And so that in the world, as you've heard the last panel talk about, we're almost always having to be defending ourselves from diet culture, or defending ourselves from the ways in which these things and these forces socially can impact our mental health. And I think instead of using that time to defend ourselves, we create spaces for people to use that time to define themselves. And I think it's a really powerful thing to do.
I love that.
It's just, yeah, that was so great. I feel like now, especially just the way the world has changed a bit with this pandemic, I just found even the world around me feels a lot more defensive. So just working out ways to bring down those walls again is just so important, and having a place to feel safe even more so. So for all of you now, as leaders in the ED community, what advice would you give to someone who wants to make a change or participate in ED advocacy? Adam, I'll start with you.
Well, the first thing that I would say is get in touch with Sheena's place, and but no, just have the conversations, have the difficult conversations with individuals with lived experience. If you're an individual with lived experience, if you're comfortable, going to an organization like Sheena's place to discuss or to help aid in your recovery, then do so. If you're comfortable in speaking to somebody, I please do so. If you're not comfortable, that's also okay. I would say learn as much as you can about the space, create awareness, create advocacy in any way that you can, because in terms of eating disorders awareness, a lot of people don't realize how staggering some of these numbers are. 2 million people across the country that are struggling with eating disorders. Mortality is the second highest out of any mental health disorder, next only to opioid addiction. Excuse me. So yeah, learning these statistics can be shocking. It can be staggering to just think about the sheer volume of individuals that are struggling with these and their families. So yeah, I would say learn as much as you can, as I'm continuing to do every single day. I know a little bit, but there's so much more to learn from just speaking to individuals with lived experience, from speaking to facilitators, and from connecting with individuals at Sheena's place on a daily basis. But yeah, I would say learn, create, discuss, go forth. I'm not good advice, but what's I've got.
I feel like that's good advice.
All right.
Ari, what about you?
Yeah, there's an Arthur Ashe quote that I have framed on my wall that says, "Start where you are, use what you have, and do what you can." And I think that's a mantra that I really like to keep close to me. Sometimes starting with what you have also means realizing that, like Adam's saying, that we might not be the most informed about the issue. And can we seek out places or sources of information like Sheena's place, or like Medic, or like reputable sources of information on this topic, because misinformation is so key, to take a pause before saying a comment that might be steeped in diet culture. I think what folks can also do is help people name things. I think when a condition lacks a name, it lacks an acknowledgement. And when it lacks an acknowledgement, it lacks validation. And when it lacks validation, it lacks treatment. So I don't think we can jump the line straight to treatment without acknowledging the issues that exist. And that includes some of the connections that all of the panelists, I think, here have made today and you've heard in the videos. And I think wherever you can, if you're in change management roles or you have decision-making power, to change either or propositions, which I think begets polarization. I think we shouldn't ever have to choose between two different types of treatment. I think all of those things need to exist because they're all potentially relevant for different folks, and accessibility is so important. So can we change either or as to and? How do we do in-person and virtual and make sure those things are funded properly? How do we do demographic-specific support groups and generalized support groups so that folks can feel connection across divides? How do we do support for folks who are early on in recovery and folks who might be experiencing lapses in their recovery? Because this is a roller coaster and there are ups and downs. And for some people, they experience full and lasting recovery, whatever that means to them. And for others, it might be something that they're living with throughout their lives, and they might need some extra space to do that. I think if we are able to acknowledge and normalize those things as loved ones, as family members, as citizens, I think we'll be able to go a long way in creating a society that is not only eating disorder informed, but one that can also cultivate a place of body acceptance, of trust in our bodies to do what they need, and flexibility in our lives so that we can just be instead of do all the time.
Very well said. Jeffrey.
I guess I can speak on behalf of someone who has lived experience, and you know, when I made a decision to become a peer mentor and to share my story on platforms like this, or publish my book, like I had to really sit with myself for a couple of moments and just like realize like, okay, everybody is going to know this thing about me, the secret that I used to keep, and it really made me hesitate for quite a bit. And then I was like, but you know what? Like this is good for myself, and I wanted to tell my truth, and I also maybe someone will not feel so alone in their experience. And since I made that decision, I sound like an Oprah commercial or something, but it's just like it's just coming back. It's just given me so much, because like the people who come to me and tell me afterwards, because you shared your story, like I was able to talk to my parents about it, or I was so alone in my in how I felt about my disorder, and you sharing your story really inspired me to, it just, I can't really, there's no way you can say how how amazing that feels to have helped someone. And I think when you share your story, like a lot of the stigma with eating disorders, like you keep it to yourself because you're so ashamed and you feel like there is something wrong with you individually. And I felt that for so many years. And then when I finally started to share my story, and then I went to Sheena's place and I heard other people share their stories, you're just looking at everybody and you're like, oh my God, we're all the same. It's like, I totally am not this, crazy person who's having all of these thoughts. I just felt so validated when others, we were able to share in our stories. And I, encourage anyone who has any lived experience, share that story, because there are other people who are suffering but don't want to say, or are too ashamed, and really they shouldn't feel that way. And because like from what I, the people who have approached me afterward, it's pretty amazing, like the people that you meet, and any help that you can give to people is great. And I just remember, like, when I was going through it a long time ago, this was a long time ago. Like I remember, like on that show, there was a show, it's still on, Entertainment Tonight, and there was like that actor, and I'd never heard of it before, but that actor, Billy Bob Thornton, he was very big because he used to be married to Angelina Jolie. Anyway, like there was this headline in Entertainment Tonight saying that, Billy Bob Thornton admits experience with eating disorder, anorexia. And I remember running to my computer, and internet was kind of new, and I was like on dial-up, so that was, but like dialing up and then just looking, I was like, I need to know, because I'd never seen a guy who would ever talk about this before. And I was so like, I need to know everything. And of course there was like only other than Entertainment Tonight talking about it, there was nothing else that I could see. And just to know now, like, the fact that Sheena's Place is doing outreach to like the trans community, the LGBT community, and I'm here sharing my perspective, like it's it's really gratifying, because there are so many of us that, feel that shame and feel that isolation, and especially during COVID as well. There's a lot of isolation going on, and, it's been really rewarding, I have to say.
It's crazy how disarming it can be to find people who seem free of judgment, right? You walk into a place and you feel like you can truly speak your truth, and when you're around people that you feel aren't judging you. And just from my experience of all these conversations today, I feel like Sheena's place is that place where you can feel safe. So I just want to thank all of you for sharing your perspectives today. It's been quite eye-opening for me. I've learned so much, and I hope the audience has taken away a bit of that as well. I just have a few moments left here. If you have any final thoughts from all of you, I would love to hear them before we say goodbye. Adam?
Yeah, I just wanted to just comment a little bit about what Jeffrey just said. I don't think I mentioned this before, but just how courageous it is to be able to tell your story in the way that you're able to tell it. And I mean, like what you're doing, and it's saving people's lives. It really is. So thank you for your courage and your ability to really, speak about your experience in such a remarkable way. And Ari, what you're doing is saving lives as well, and facilitating groups where individuals with lived experience with eating disorders are able to be in an environment where they're comfortable enough to share their stories with one another and understand, as Jeffrey so eloquently put, they're not alone. They're not the only ones that are experiencing these thoughts. Oh my goodness, this person to my left, this person to my right, everybody in this room is having the same thoughts and having the same experience. And that's tying it back to, initially, what I initially said about how I got introduced to Sheena's Place. This individual in my family, my sister said to me, she said, Sheena's Place is the one place that I can go to where I feel like I'm not alone. And that sort of speaking to Jeffrey's experience, to exactly what he was saying. It's an environment that I can feel safe in, that I can feel as though I'm able to speak about what it is that I go through and not feel isolated. So that's my final thought.
Thank you, Adam. Ari?
Yeah, I think building on Jeffrey, I think we all have a role to play. Everyone has a role, like Jeffrey, and having that courage to access Sheena's Place for the first time and be able to experience all of the things that came with that. Adam, and being able to support folks even in his position as a decision maker and on the board, and being able to amplify the work. And John and you, even Marissa, on being able to tell stories both through your role at TSN and the documentary that you were able to learn from, and being able to now have those conversations with other people. I think I'd want everyone in the audience to also think about the roles that they can play too, because I think everyone can have a role as we work to support folks who are impacted by this issue across the country.
Thank you, Ari. Jeffrey, final thoughts?
Oh, no, I echo all the sentiments. Like it's just wonderful. This is what I felt like when I was in the group. Like I felt by the end of that group, I felt like we were all cheerleaders, just cheerleading for each other. And that's one thing that Sheena's Place, because that was one of the first resources I went to, and it really just set me in the right direction in terms of, having my own perspective on things and being in the right environment. And Sheena's Place gave me that team of cheerleaders, and I'm just so happy to be here. So.
I'm very happy to be here as well. I really want to thank all of you for joining me today on this panel. It's been incredible, insightful, and thoughtful. I want to thank the audience members for their attention as well this evening, and thank you to our wonderful organizers who've been fantastic behind the scenes as well. I'd like to also take this opportunity to invite people to shout out 2022 to celebrate Sheena's Place Silver Anniversary Gala. It will take place at 1 King West from 6:30 to midnight on May 26, 2022. Early bird tickets are available online. Thank you again, gentlemen, for your time. I'm going to pass it over now to John for closing remarks.
Thank you, Marissa. I'd like to just say thanks for moderating today. You did a wonderful job. I would like to extend thanks also to all of our panelists. And a special shout out to Stephen Bowen and Caitlin Axelrod for pulling the event together and running things behind the scenes. 25 years of Sheena's Place. I'd be remiss not to shout out our founders, Trudy Egan, Jane Fenton, Ellen Carpenter, for pulling together the people and the resources that were necessary to establish Sheena's place, and for having the vision of creating a safe space for folks to gather and gain support, and hopefully see a way to recovery in dealing with such a complex and challenging set of eating disorders. I would also like to sort of piggyback on a lot of Adam's sentiments and really extend thank you for all the folks that sort of contributed along the way. If you happen to be tuning in and were one of the volunteers or staff folks or donors from any point in time in the past 25 years, thank you. You have done a wonderful job of establishing and growing and adapting and responding to the needs of the folks that sought support here. And thank you to the, literally at this point, tens of thousands of folks who had the courage to walk through the doors, and in more recent times, sort of log in online to show up for yourselves and to show up for each other. Because a critical element of the work we do here at Sheena's Place is allow for folks to experience that sense of connectedness and the support that all of the participants provide for each other. That's really where the magic happens. I've had the privilege of being allowed to co-facilitate the Family, Friends, and Partners group that's been referenced a few times tonight in this season. And it's been really a privilege to hear the inspiring stories and experiences that our members share, and a real opportunity to hear about the impacts firsthand. One of the members recently shared their experience of experiencing a significant amount of physical pain in the recent past. And in the short time sort of leading up to the group, in anticipation, not only did their mood improve, but they felt their physical pain dissipate quite a bit as well. So the members share that they look forward to that time, and it's making a critical difference in their capacity to cope and continue to support their loved ones. We do have our work cut out for us moving forward. You've heard from all of our panelists that in the past 25 years, while gains have been made and changes have happened, the need is probably greater and more vast than it's ever been, only multiplied by the pandemic in the recent past year and a half or 2 years. And at Sheena's Place, we are aware that while a lot of incredible work has happened, there have been folks that we haven't been able to serve adequately. And I will say that the organization is ready and willing to face those challenges and work tirelessly to continue to build upon the work that's been done before us. And as an organization, we are on really solid footing and in a really good place to continue to grow and innovate and just really work hard to sort of be there for our community and to continue to serve. I hope you enjoyed your time with us tonight. I thank you, each and every one of the folks who tuned in tonight. I hope you're able to join us on May 26th of next year as we anticipate the joy that will come from a shared experience that isn't only online. We'll be inviting folks to join us virtually and really looking forward to being able to be in the same room with many of you as well. I invite you to follow us on social media, stay connected, reach out to me or other members of the team at any time if you just want to chat, have questions. If you need us, we'll be here. Thank you very much.